Daniele is a Swiss historian and a peace researcher at Basel University, and his research interests include international history from 1945 to the present, secret warfare and geostrategy, intelligence services and special forces, resource wars, globalization, and human rights. So his areas of specialization are very important for the listeners to this show. These are areas of concern that we have. And Daniele is the author of what is probably the definitive book on Operation Gladio, called NATO's Secret Armies, Operation Gladio, and Terrorism in Western Europe. And this book is in English, and it's also been published in German and perhaps in other languages. Daniele, has it been translated into any other languages?
Yeah, it's now been published in 10 different languages. So it's available in English, in German, in Spanish, in Italian, in Finnish, in I don't actually remember all the languages, but I know that it's been published in 10 languages.
Well, that's so appropriate because the sweep of the book, it covers all of those languages. Your research is incredible. You've read in archives and literature in virtually all the European languages. It's a highly impressive book, and the subject is of such deep interest, one would think, for citizens of all the European countries as well as citizens of the world, that it's fantastic that it's been made available like that. So, in the book you chart the broad sweep of a distinctive secret setup that was used to control the politics of European countries after World War II until quite recently, and one might even question whether those structures might not still exist. Maybe we could talk about that after a while. But since you're the expert, how would you like to just introduce us to what is Operation Gladio? What does the term refer to?
Well, it is a term which is not very well known, it has to be said. Even experts on international politics that I approached some years ago, I asked them, do you know about the secret NATO army, which is codenamed Gladio? And they said no. They were my professors, and I was doing a PhD, and I was studying at the London School of Economics and Political Science in London. These people were, very well educated, so I asked them, do you know more details about Gladio? And most people had no clue, because it was not very much in the news. So that's sort of the first thing. If there's somebody among your listeners who's never heard of Gladio, that's just very normal. Most people have never heard of it. Then this made me very curious, and I started to look at the data available. And what we do have is a confession from the Italian Prime Minister, Giulio Andreotti, who it's already 20 years ago now, in 1990, at the end of the Cold War, confirmed in front of the Italian Parliament that indeed there had existed a secret army in Italy, and that this secret army had the name Gladio. So this is actually the code name for the secret army which operated in Italy. And this was very sensitive. The Prime Minister explained that secret armies also existed in all other countries of Western Europe, that they were trained by the American CIA and the British MI6, and that was a big scandal at the time. Yeah,
it certainly was. So the CIA and MI6 trained Italian men, and then these men were organized in a secret structure that somehow the CIA or MI6 was able to manipulate. How did the CIA exert control over Italian citizens?
The task of the secret Gladio army, we call them stay-behind armies, that's the military term, was twofold. So the secret soldiers, they basically had two functions. Their first function was to wait for a Soviet invasion, because, you know, as most of your listeners probably know and remember, during the Cold War, Western Europe was scared of a Soviet invasion and occupation. And so NATO designed these secret armies and said, in case that the Western European zone should be occupied by the Red Army, we need some sort of a resistance network. We need secret soldiers, guerrillas, who have explosives and weapons which are hidden in forests, in arms caches, or even on cemeteries. They had arms caches hidden in graves, and they just operated as a secret force. And you know, one idea was to say they would only become operative in case of a Soviet invasion, and that was what many people have said right when these secret soldiers were discovered. But that was not the whole story. There was a second task, and we now have documents from the Italian military secret service, which is called SISMI, Servizio Informazione e Sicurezza Militare, so that's the Italian military secret service, and in these documents it explicitly says that the stay-behind armies, the Gladio network, had a second task, which was to control the Italian population in case of an emergency, as they put it, but they don't specify what an emergency is. They basically leave it open to the secret services to become operational when they think it's an emergency.
Well, so there's no evidence then that any of these secret armies, and they were, as you said, they're very widespread across Europe. It wasn't just Italy, but they were set up more or less along similar lines in every Western European country. So Portugal, Spain, France, Greece, Belgium, Germany, etc. Similar structures in all these countries. The Soviets never did invade. At some point, it must have become fairly clear that it was unlikely that the Soviet Union would invade. I'm wondering how genuinely the governments of Western Europe really feared an invasion by the Soviet Union, certainly after a certain length of time. But so there was this other purpose, which essentially it's turned out was to control the domestic politics of the countries and to prevent any kind of leftward movement in the governments. Isn't that correct?
That is correct, because the Italian judge who discovered the network, his name is Felice Casson. What he did is he researched a specific act of terrorism in Italy. It was an act which had been carried out in 1972 in the Italian village of Peteano. It was a car bomb which had killed a few people, policemen, and which was at the time attributed to the left Italian terrorist group Brigate Rosse, the Red Brigades. At the time, this charge was made through an anonymous phone call, and everybody in Italy at the time believed it. I mean, it was spread by the media, it was spread by the news, so everybody thought, okay, here's a terrorist attack, which shows that the communists are dangerous. And only 10 or 20 years later, you know, it can take so long to really get the truth about a terrorist attacks. This investigative judge found out that, in fact, it had been the secret network Gladio which had carried out the attack. A right-wing extremist, Vincenzo Vinciguerra, confessed to the judge that he had carried out the terrorist attack and that he had thereafter been supported by the Italian military secret service to flee the country, to go to Spain, which at the time was under Franco, a fascist dictatorship, and so he was safe there. Or other people were flown to Chile, which at the time was a dictatorship under Pinochet. So actually the secret service helped right-wing extremists to carry out terrorist attacks, which were blamed on the left to discredit them, and then they were flown to countries where nobody could in fact arrest them. It was quite a dark and evil plan, but it worked.
Well, now, couldn't it have been additionally that the Secret Service actually instructed these right-wing cells to carry out specific attacks and set up the target and provided the, in other words, it wasn't just a matter of helping, random right-wing terrorist attack, perpetrators of right-wing terror to escape, but wasn't it more a matter of directing them in a campaign of terror?
It is very hard to reconstruct the chain of command for these terrorist attacks. We do know, as a matter of fact, that these terrorist attacks took place. There were several in Italy. There was one in the 70s. There was another one, a big one, in 1980 at Bologna. That's the one who is best known because it was a railway station which exploded at the time in August when everybody was going for a holiday. So imagine a summer day in Italy. Everybody is drinking his cafe or having a pizza, and everybody's ready for the big summer break, which is more than a month in Italy. It's really the biggest holiday, and everybody's happy. And then in the midst of this beginning of the summer break, we had a terrorist attack in Bologna when the railway station exploded with over 80 people dead and about 200 maimed. And also there we do have evidence that right-wing extremists, together with the secret services, were involved. And Italian courts have always tried to get at the truth of these terrorist operations, and it has been very, very difficult because we have very little written data on who ordered the terrorist attacks. Yeah. And we have Italian military service members who then claimed that, in fact, they had received the orders from the CIA to carry out terrorist attacks, and that made it even more difficult for historians like me to research this, because really the question of CIA terrorism in Europe is an absolute taboo. Nobody is talking about it. It is, you can lose your job at the university still today if you speak about this. But we have data from Italian generals. Daniele Maletti is one who said in court that yes, they were involved in these terrorist attacks. And then the Italian population got very angry and said, why do you kill our, sisters and brothers and elderly and women and children? I mean, it's just cruel. Why do you do it? And then they said, that was the Cold War, and the Americans and the British, they wanted us to do this. It's called the strategy of tension.
Uh-huh. And what does that term, how does that term encompass these activities?
The strategy of tension is actually a strategy which says we want to spread fear within the population. So what researchers in Italy and also in Belgium, we had a series of attacks in Belgium and a series of attacks in France and in Greece also. So we've had a very long terrorism debate in Europe, before 9/11 happened in the United States, and this terrorism debate shows that in some cases terrorism is being manipulated in the sense that it is not a surprise attack from somebody outside the state, but the state itself can carry out terrorist attacks against the population in order to shock the population and discredit a political enemy. This is something, it has to be stressed, really. I mean, when I work on these subjects with my students who are 20 or 25 years old, and, they just study international history and want to find out how the world works, when they hear this, they say, but this is impossible. How can the state, we pay taxes to the state, and that's already difficult, but how can the state, whom we pay taxes and who has the task to protect us, attack us through secret terrorist operations? And then when we try to get at the truth and ask for an investigation, cover up. I mean, this is really something which, many people who've read this book that I've written on NATO's Secret Army, they come to me and say, I mean, how is this possible? And I have to confess myself that sometimes amazed that these things can happen without that we have a large debate on manipulated terrorism.